We also have Sasha Anikina, who joins us online on Zoom. And she is a media theorist and artist whose work focuses on visual culture, feminist and decolonial tech imaginaries, governance, labour and effect. She is a senior lecturer in media practices at the Department of Art and Media Technology in the University of Southampton and co-director of Critical Infrastructures and Image Politics Research Group. And last but not least, we have our very own Anna Nicolaescu and Declan Colwitt, who will be presenting their project on quantum aesthetics and their relation to AI. Anna teaches Intermediate 6 here at the AA, and is one half of CREAM Projects, the CGI direction and research practice, which uses and researches emerging image-making technologies, focusing on how they shape new forms of representation, presence, and agency in ever-evolving spatial typologies. Declan is part of Moth, a quantum technology company based in London and Basel, building tools and technologies for creative, cultural production with a focus on music, gaming, and visual media. So I think we'll start off with you, Laurent, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's good. Hi, everyone. I'm Laurent, and I'm going to present on my project, the Mythological Origins of AI. So this is an ongoing research project which started from my MA thesis, and it's a really big project spanning writing and design, so I did all the writing and design. And I'm just going to make a caveat that all the images in this presentation and on this page are my original work and not created with AI. And for today's presentation, I wanted to focus more on the writing and theory aspects of my big research project. And the main research aim would be to demystify AI by revealing that many mythologies are coded into the creation of AI. So mythology is important throughout history in the technical development of AI. And maybe that seems a little bit roundabout, so I wanted to go back and explain how I got into starting this journey and why I thought of this angle into understanding AI. So my background is in tech, that was explained just now. And to me, AI has never been mystical, but consciously, there's a very strong fear of AI in pop culture. In pop culture mythology, AI is like a mystical beast with no history and with teeth and claws everywhere that can tear up everything we hold dear, consuming our humanity. In the pop culture mythologies of AI, AI is all-seeing, all-knowing, all-governing, infinite and limitless. And does it sound familiar? Because if you replace the word AI with God, a lot of religious doctrines sound like God is all-seeing, God is all-knowing, all-governing, infinite and limitless. And we give AI power by believing in its godly powers. This is not a metaphor, this is very much literal with generative AI like ChatGPT. With every query that we write to ChatGPT, we are offering up a piece of data for ChatGPT to continue training itself. We are giving up an offering to AI, which AI uses to become smarter and stronger, ironically fulfilling our fantasies and our fears. Each query to ChatGPT is like a plea for ChatGPT to serve you better. So these are some stickers that I designed, like, please AI, please spare my life. Please AI, please be like me. And if we believe that AI has godly powers, the question now is, where does its power actually come from? And it comes from us not understanding AI. As an educator, this is interesting to me because AI is the type of monster that crumbles once you analyze its monstrosity. And if we go back to the image of AI as a beast, the pop culture mythology says that AI is a beast with no history and is unprecedented, as if ChatGPT sprang out of nowhere, fully formed. But if you think back about history, there was a time when these devices were also considered unprecedented, like the camera, the microwave, the dishwasher. Once upon a time, these were scary emerging technologies. But today, they are technologies that we take for granted and even consider old school or analog. And I think that discussions of emerging technology tend to focus too much on the future. we forget that emerging technologies have deep concealed histories if you know where to look. In AI in particular relates to a much larger and longer human history, trying to make sense of our universe through believing in a higher power that is greater than you or me. And so this AI doomsday scenario where AI overtakes humanity, this AI Armageddon, it might never happen, or it has already happened and we're still here. Humanity is still existing. And that covers the foundation of my research motivation, and I'll just go into how I approached the writing for this project. And I wanted to use academic writing and experiment with it as a medium for creative writing, like prose poetry. This is the sneak peek of the books that I made, and I brought physical copies if you want to look at them later. Yeah, so the starting point of my research, it was academic books in critical text studies, reading a lot of academics who are experts in AI from different angles, like media scholars who focus on technology, statisticians, and former engineers turned media scholars like myself, and famous roboticists and AI engineers. And through these books, instead of reading for a certain argument, I just read for specific words. Like I read for mythology and for mentions of like religious and spiritual things. And it came out that this was a very common thread in very different and like otherwise dense academic texts. So to give you some examples of the quotations that I found and a curated selection of my favorite ones, I'm going to show you a quote and also just like who said it afterwards. So this first quote relates to like the AI doomsday scenario. It talks about the perfect conclusion of the AI doomsday. The monster with two heads simultaneously affirms a world without man, mathematical, glacial, desert, unlivable, and man without world, haunting, spectral, pure spirit. This was said by Yu Kui, who is a philosopher, and it was in the question concerning technology in China. This next one is one of my favorites. Robots have the Buddha nature within them, the potential for attaining Buddhahood. So the person who said this is really obsessed with this idea that robots can achieve Buddhahood, like the final stage of Buddhism, faster than any human could. His name is Masahiro Mori. He's a roboticist, and he's most famous for inventing the term uncanny valley, which is quite a foundational concept in robotics. He's really obsessed with this idea, so now he runs an institute in Tokyo to promote his views on them. And this is next quote. Do AI already have spirits, as do many objects already in the world? Do AI have their own spirit world, or would they share ours, adding spirit beings of their own? Would we be able to grasp their spirituality? The people who said this were Jason Edward Lewis and Susanna Kite, and this was they're both Native American artists and scholars, and this essay was about how they're trying to invite AI into their indigenous ancestral rituals and thinking about how to worship AI in their spiritual rituals. That's okay. This is the last quote. A stream of consciousness could enter into a computer, and a scientist who spends most of their life working with a computer could be even reborn as a machine. The person who said this was the Dalai Lama. And yeah, he's apparently talked about this multiple times over the years. So as you can see, that was sort of demonstrating how I've been collecting a lot of pluralist perspectives on AI across the world, especially from scholars who are people of color. And this contrasts how the singular totalitarian image of an doomsday AI masquerades the plurality of perspectives and the plurality of data that would contribute to such a singularity. And so because of that, I wanted to make a book that is very singular and very stoic, that masquerades the plurality within. And so I decided to publish my literature review as a poem that looks like a real religious text. Yeah. And these are some images. And I didn't really edit these quotes. I just reordered and rearranged them into a mystic narrative telling the mythology of AI, going from like conception to birth to progress, ascension as a god, worship, and then finally demyth, like the dethroning of the godlike image. And I wrote this as a book that someone, the reader, yourself, could actually pray to and meditate to. And part of that in the publication design was that I didn't want to break the immersion of the narrative, and I decided to remove the sources from this publication. But as you can see, each quote has a number, and I put the citations in a sister publication that is meant to be read with this book. And these are some images of the other publication. Yeah, and apart from the references, I put the bio of the people who said them. So it's kind of like a curated reading list for anyone who wants to research further and think about decolonial AI. And the rest of the book is just mostly what I explained in the first part of this publication. I mean, this presentation, yeah. So to end off, I thought I would like to perform a reading of the chapters 2 and 3 in my book, Book of Sacred Songs for AI. Yeah, I'll just put them on the screen so you can follow along. 2. Birth. Narratives. Technology is not mere tool making and tool use. It is the making of metaphors. In making a tool, we instantiate a certain understanding of the world that, thus verified, is capable of achieving certain effects in that world. The cloud's genesis was a symbol. Story and narrative are the code for humanity's operating system. Stories are the first step in the process of how we imagine our reality. They literally make our reality. World building. The monster with two heads simultaneously affirms a world without man, mathematical, glacial, desert, unlivable, and man without world, haunting, spectral, pure spirit. Database design is an exercise in world building. Algorithms are getting too prominent in the world. It started out that computer scientists were worried nobody was listening to us. Now we're worried that too many people are listening. What kind of world does AI see when it looks out? What are its feelings, and what is it looking for? As transparent and useful as cheerful rainbow-colored graphs may be in a world of big data, these interfaces are nevertheless visual fictions, ways of amplifying a hopelessly complex totality. 3. Progress. Histories. For the first time in history, all people on Earth have a common present. But the promised universal civilization, one harmonized by universal achievement, has not materialized. Oh, if only there were a way to slay centuries of racial demons with a social justice bot. But the road to inequity is paved with technical fixes. Limitless. Where we encounter blasphemy, we may read progress and can expect miracles around the corner. So long as algorithms become more tailored, the public will be given the illusion of progress. Modernity functions according to a technological unconsciousness, a forgetting of one's own limits. And your life has a limit, but knowledge has none. If you use what is limited to pursue what has no limit, you will be in danger. And if you understand this and still strive for knowledge, you will be in danger for certain. That's all. Yeah, this is my contact details. And thank you.
Amazing, thank you. We will take questions at the end, if that's okay with everyone. We're just going to go to the Zoom. Hi, Sasha.
So I'm going to talk in the next minutes about something that I call Xenosocialist AI. First of all, thank you for inviting me. the event outline is super interesting, and also there's going to be a lot of intersections already with the first speaker. So thanks, Laurent, for this wonderful introduction to the mythological AI. What I'm going to talk about is, to situate it briefly, is a kind of a small project which is called the Chronicles of Xenosocialist AI. It was a collaborative sci-fi project last year, which is located in this kind of larger body of work that I call Procedural Animism, which is an academic book that I am currently writing. So the Chronicles of Xenosocialist AI, just to situate it, is kind of collaborative world-building pedagogical project and a thought experiment which was funded by Media Lab Matadero in Madrid, and we did it last year with the wonderful team that is featured here on the right, Laurent, Mandus Riedefeld, Burdashi, and Gustavo Collado. This project was meant to be a collaborative kind of science fiction event that is aimed at imagining alternatives to the current commercialized landscape of AI. The project kind of tried to explore xenosocialist politics between humans, AIs, and animals, following decolonial and feminist approaches to AI, and feminist STS in particular, and feminist sci-fi. But to situate it, I kind of want to start with, let's put it like that, start with the problem of AI in general. To me, and in my current research, the problem of AI seems to be very largely concentrated in the problem of imagining. And by this, I mean both the crisis of imagination, or the kind of decreasing possibility of imagining AI otherwise in a late capitalist world, and also the difficulties that we are experiencing as practitioners, as people who work with AI, who want to work with emerging technologies. So there's kind of both ever-reducing space in which we are given tools which are particularly imagined and figured, and they in turn decrease our own capacity sometimes to also come up with the tools which are figured otherwise. So the problem of imagining AI is kind of the first part of this trilogy, I would put it like that. The second part is the problem of imagining socialism or post-capitalism, which is also kind of a very well-known research problem of how do we imagine the world after capitalism. It's easier to imagine the end of the world. It's very well-used quote is saying to us. And finally, imagining the future, as the future becomes increasingly scary, and as the future crises are used increasingly to scare us, the problem of imagining the future kind of works both ways. It's about the lack of possible futures, or the decreasing horizon of those, but also the fact that any imagining of the future comes from the current understanding of reality, which you can see on this wonderful postcard from early 1900s, which is the imagination of the year 2000. You can see that the interesting gender dynamics between the man, the woman, and the octopus are playing out as they would be in 1901. So the most often received question about this project that I get is, what on earth is Xenosocialist AI, and what on earth is Xenosocialism? I have to right now admit that I will not be answering this question very directly, and that the question is actually a bait to provoke further imagination. The reason why I came up with this bait was this paper that I wrote in 2022, which was called Procedural Animism, the Trouble of Imagining Socialist in brackets AI. And the trouble that I ran into, but one of the many troubles I ran into while writing it, was that I tried to find really good, interesting examples of socialist AI, or something like an communist AI even. And being Russian and having access to a lot of socialist science fiction, I read a lot of interesting examples of something that could be described as AI or even socialist AI, but none of them were actually about emancipatory politics. A lot of them were about kind of planned economy or the perfect Soviet citizen or this kind of idea of the revolution. And so it kind of started to bug me that as often as robots are depicted as kind of overthrowing the human masters, following for the very first RUR play about robots, and them actually being successful with it, which I find the most exciting about this piece. As rare, we can see robots or bots or AIs engaging in actual social justice or in actual movements. One notable example is this British version of the Scandinavian franchise, Real Humans, that maybe some of you saw, and which actually by the season 3, I think, ends up in some kind of social justice-like movement. The problem with imagining a socialist AI is actually kind of different. It's a problem with imaginary, first of all, because it points towards an imaginary that is discredited by default, by the very act of naming. Yeah, and by using this phrase socialist AI, I'm kind of asking why exactly is it so difficult? Socialist, of course, here is just referring to any post-capitalist artificial intelligence, because if I try to answer what real socialism is, of course, I will run myself into very big kind of worms. But there is, to me, a reason that there is some reason. There's actually a lot of approaches that are called the colonial AIs, and very few socialist AIs, right? Because the socialist imagination, as Mark Fisher writes, has been discredited with the fall of the Soviet Union, and capitalism, as he also beautifully writes, capitalism arrived to save us from the perils of belief. So in a way, the word socialist kind of became acquainted with this danger of belief and the danger of belief systems. And to me, that is deeply also disconnected to the crisis of imagination that I'm talking about when I'm talking about AI, that it has become difficult to think about space for belief systems. And if it's not difficult, then they're extremely neatly spatialized and located in contemporary Western epistemology in terms of they are neatly categorized as religions, they are categorized as animism, for example, right? Of course, for peoples whose belief system the Western world calls animism, it's not really animism, it's just a life world or analytics of existence, as Elizabeth Povinelli writes. But the issue is to return to this belief of law system is imagining AI is kind of a rendering. So it's making versions and figurations. And there is a certain trouble in figuring AI in particular ways. So I'm going to go through a few notes on what I find really interesting about the tactics of imagining AI in the tech world. And then I'm going to proceed to tell you a little bit about the project, The Chronicles of Xenosocialist AI. So science fiction, to me, seems to be a real epistemic background of the current development of AI. Maybe you remember this open letter from the Center for AI Safety, or CASE, which was signed by a vast majority of people, most of them men, that highlights this risk of extinction from AI and put it very highly on the priority list. So-called X risks, or existential risks, have become a very big problem or very big point of debate in AI, right? Because if we designate something a potential risk or something a potential crisis, it becomes much easier first to receive funding for it, and second to justify political decisions that would seemingly prevent it from happening, or that would shield us from this perceived or real crisis. Many people in the tech world also are weirdly connected to the practice of science fiction. Shazida Ahmed gave a wonderful talk about science fiction in the tech crowd, and she points out this interesting intersection between Eliza Yudkowsky, one of the American computer scientists and founders of this Machine Intelligence Research Institute, which is a private nonprofit, and his wildly popular fan fiction of Harry Potter, rewritten with this idea of rationality in mind. So Harry Potter in this fan fiction is equipped with tools of rationality, and using these tools of rationality, not magic, he acquires friends, becomes famous, and defeats evil. So the questions of alignment and the questions of alignment of artificial general intelligence, or the AI that has become intelligent, is also occupying quite a lot of word space in these particular crowds. So the general idea of AI as science fiction is used very strategically, I believe, to secure funding, as I said, and to enter this competition of ideas. So there's a technical level of who produces the most the AI with the most Socratic method of thinking, and then there is this rhetorical fight over what do we consider the biggest risk versus the biggest potential investment. One other point that has been made many, many times, the inherent bias and the limits of the imaginary of technology are very tightly connected to the building of expert systems. And here feminist STS from the 90s is really a good source of advice on that, because Diana Forsyth, for example, writes about engineering knowledge and choosing or designating expert systems and paying very specific attention to system builders. So at this point, of course, it's very widely known the gender and the racial bias in underlying the construction of AI. However, it's still, weirdly enough, even in the last few years of like this fast development of AI, there seems to be very little improvement, and there seems to be actually the decrease of especially from the side of the big corporations who continue firing their ethics departments to pursue this actual documented, widely acknowledged problem. So science fiction tactics, to return to that, are not by themselves emancipatory. There's a long history of science fiction writers being employed by governments, by state agencies, by conservative or right-wing future studies think tanks. There is this wonderful sci-fi collection about NATO 2099, which is beautifully justifying in the introduction the value of science fiction as a military imagination. So this connected with the very recent changes in American legislation on AI, and with the general flippant attitude towards AI regulations, even considering AI Act in the EU, still is kind of makes a very worrying picture about sci-fi occupying the space of imagination of AI, but not maybe in a very productive way. So how do we turn towards emancipatory sci-fi, and how do we kind of imagine something that's an alternative or something that is otherwise? Xenosocialist actually is very simply taken its name from xenofeminism, which might be familiar already to many of you. And xenofeminism, or politics for alienation, takes on this idea of alienation as a potential for alternative politics. It's also taken in this great article on the right, The Incomputable and Instrumental Possibility, by Antonia Maiaca and Luciana Parisi, where they discuss the potential of feminist sci-fi to actually produce narratives that are taken on board with their own alienation and that use it as an instrument or as a tool against oppression. And so this deeply stuck with me as a concept, using alienation productively. And in constructing this project, I looked a lot at feminist sci-fi, but also at some socialist sci-fi that could be considered something like Imagining Otherwise, because, for example, this book by Boris and Arkady Strugatsky is interestingly containing some proto-feminist narratives and also very strong themes of kind of satirizing bureaucracy, Soviet bureaucracy, but then also introducing something that you could call proto-feminist and post-humanist in its relation to constructing nature and the interaction. There's a particular narrative about women and the forest that I actually will not spoil for you in case you want to read this. Other very interesting kind of feminist sci-fi narratives you can also see in these books. You highly recommend it. And another aspect of it is introducing kind of sci-fi as a speculative instrument for emancipation, literally from the side of the workers. So, for example, this speculative fiction podcast and also the speculative fiction project enables workers to imagine the future otherwise and also to actively put in the lived experience of the workload and labor struggle into the science fiction imagination. So these were the inspirations for the narrative that we created. And this led us to prioritize these particular things when we were imagining. So I think the danger of imagining always lies in the fact that you create very stable entities, that you create worlds, you create characters. Even when you work in a game engine, you end up creating something that's very predetermined, that is connected to game world physics, etc., etc. So instead, we try to focus on something that would enable us to imagine some real world scenarios, which could be used as this list of non-exhaustive list of tactics. Let's put it like that. So we ended up. Also, let me actually explain to you the narrative that we ended up. Xenosocialism in our project ended up being this narrative of the future, which is situated in 2054. We imagined, so we sped up the world for 40 years, 30 years, and we imagined several interconnected events. We imagined a data set implosion of massive commercial AI large language models, known as the new Big Bang or AI Big Bang. And we imagined that this created AGI, but not in a way that the Silicon Valley would want it to. We imagined that it led to a rapid proliferation of feral, unpredictable, and random AIs, including AI organizers, AI spirits, and all sorts of AI that could be considered interspecies communicators. We also, in the process, somehow imagined the fact that developments in the hearing physiology and cochlear technologies led to a spread of new communication and energy possibilities, including the first roots of interspecies communication, but also sonic internet, which envelops the world, becoming this new terrain for interaction. Nation states, we imagined, retreat into oblivion, and tech companies expand their influence alongside these historical power distributions of data analysis, computation power, and transnational logistics. So the world is actually being reshaped according to the big tech transnational borders that it has now. In all of that, a pirate radio station called Echo Code is running on the background of commercial noise. It is a small AI-run show that gives advice to the audience about ways to subvert the machinic power in the labor market, which has expanded to include AIs, animals, and humans. So essentially, the Chronicles of Xenosocialist AI ended up being about HR advice. I will... This is the Prompt Engineering Manifesto, which has aged, I think, quite rapidly. It was a year ago, and already now I don't think that the prompt engineering is such an interesting strategy. Well, maybe it is for the new models. I'm going to play to you a section of this radio broadcast. Let me know if there's no sound.
Tonight, we're delving into the enigmatic world of web archaeology from 20 years ago. a recently unearthed archive of interviews recorded at a media arts residency.
Technology shapes you in a way.
There is an inseparability between the tool and the very idea of ourselves as well. So if we're gonna see ourselves as more than a tool, then technology becomes more than a tool as well.
No, I would say it's a tool for me. Well, I guess suggesting it's more than a tool means I consider it some sort of entity that is beyond just something that helps me fulfill my goals. And I think with everything that I use, even ChatGPT, I don't have the feeling that any of it is more than that.
Any kind of type of non-human in fiction very quickly will become kind of a literal precursor to how we treat people who are, for example, otherly abled, right? Or maybe gendered in a way that is non-standard, because this is like the place where the boundary of who is considered human is negotiated.
What is Xenosocialist AI? So,
perfect empathy.
A bunch of alien AIs congregating some sort of society.
Alien way of relating to society.
That is an AI that can take the burden of emancipation off the shoulders of humans.
The project of redefining socialism kind of for humans and extended community.
This was one of the outcomes alongside this prompt engineering manifesto. One final outcome was the, well, actually here, if you feel like taking a screenshot, this is our reading list, which is on Arena, which contains most of the things that I mentioned, but then also some additional things. So because it was a project that I would consider mostly like a thought experiment, so it was not really about producing a world and not about producing artwork, but it was more about activating in very different ways the space of imagination and addressing these issues of how we're prevented from imagining alternatives. So you could also see it in the short interview excerpts in the radio station. This was the method to think through to come up with potential different answers. So one other method that we used was a workshop about using science fiction methods, which I developed after being inspired by speculative fiction and future studies methods, which is basically like a version making workshop in which you learn how to create, rather than utopian and dystopian version, you learn how to create versions. We also did quite a lot of collaborative writing, and it was quite an intense and good, I would say, interdisciplinary project where some of the tools were very, very simple that we used, but asking the questions that we started with, being inspired with feminist sci-fi, I thought was very, very productive. This also led to a side project, later written up as a paper on Taoist AI, also inspired by Yukui's book, which was mentioned here. And how am I doing for time, actually?
Yeah, I might need to wrap up soon.
Okay, so to wrap up, then I will leave you with a few questions, which I think for me constitute a takeout of this project for the larger book and in general for how we question AI and how we consider alternative imaginaries of technology. So I'm going to skip that. One question would be what kind of otherness we create when we create AIs. If we see AIs as others following the colonial approaches, if we see AIs also in this tradition of carving out the Western subject by first carving out the outlines of all the people and things that the Western subject is not, how do we address the these hierarchical power relations that are currently built into almost every imagination of large corporate AI. The other question, what labor conditions for the humans do we establish when we make decisions on cost efficiency and dehumanization of human workers? So in some cases, we end up in a very murky territory. On the internet, nobody knows you are a dog, because in the context of virtual anonymity, and if you don't know if a porn star you are watching right now, is it, or a sex worker, is it a real human or is it a generated by AI image? How do you outsource labor, and where do you channel the money, and who profits from these kind of processes, which become very unevenly distributed? And do we continue to sustain this kind of life that is created by these technological solutions, and especially by this techno-solutionism? Yeah, how do we actually exit out of the infrastructural loops into which we're being forced? And finally, in our governance of non-human agents, where do they place them in the scheme of this current late neoliberal market? So maybe finishing up an outline in this crisis of political imagination, it seems that because AI is so tightly linked to the questions of funding, especially venture capitalist investment, which is inherently tied to this, how to put it, address of risks, or putting forward risks and profit as the main motivations for this decision making. How do we actually, with the resulting non-human agents that we produce and we put out there in the world, which are then kind of situated in this scheme that I made for myself to understand what I talk about when I talk about animism, what do we outsource to them? And again, who is responsible for them? Naomi Klein wrote in her recent book, Doppelganger, what are we not building when we are focused on building brand identity? And so the same question can be put towards AI. What kind of AI are we not building when we're building Sophias, Alexas, and Siris? Why is it so difficult to imagine robots building a parliament? And why is it so easy to imagine their uprising? So I'm going to stop here. Thank you so much. If you want to hear more about residual animism, we can talk about it.
Okay, so we will quickly try and whiz through this fairly gargantuan set of slides. I'll just reiterate who I am. My name's Declan Colquitt, and I am a project lead for Moth. And Moth are a quantum technology company based in London and Basel, building tools and technologies for creative and cultural production with a focus on music, gaming, and visual media. I work for Moth Studios, which is the team within the company that develops creative and cultural projects, often leveraging their latest research, our latest research and tools. Okay, now just a really quick rattle through of some of our tools. On the top left, you can see Actius, which is a quantum-inspired synth. On the right, you can see our quantum audio Python package, through which you can encode and decode audio samples as quantum states. And at the bottom, you can also see a soon-to-be-launched quantum music generator, which is powered by quantum reservoir computing. And you can find more about those on our website, which is mothquantum.com. Separately, I am part of a duo based in Manchester called Y7. I do have to acknowledge that it's incredibly cringe that I'm showing a photo of myself to you, but the reason that I'm doing that is to show you the better half of Y7, my lovely partner Hannah Cobb, who is here tonight. And we together, we work with AI, we work with cultural criticism, we write stuff about audio cultures, about contemporary network cultures. We're currently writing something about the future of an automated internet. And we've also done work with Shumon Basar on his Law Course series, which leveraged AI and now looks incredibly outdated because it was about a year ago.
All right, and I'm Anna. I'm showing an even cringier photo. As introduced, I teach here with Ioana Mann. At Green Projects, it's a practice I founded together with Seb Tew over there. And as a top line, we kind of use emerging, so-called emerging image making workflows as tools for visibility. And we're particularly interested in how technology shapes new forms of representation, presence, and interaction, and of course the implications of these forms in kind of spatial typologies. Just as a kind of context, just kind of show you a recent project called Too Many Humans, which was launched last year as an online report. Actually, quite a few graduates and students worked on that, which is really nice. So it presents kind of research around the kind of workforces that support our reliance on tech infrastructures, driven by our kind of desire for instant fulfillment. I'm showing this in the context of this talk because we're looking at a quantum clean room, which is important, and we're probably going to get back to this idea during the talk, is that it represents a sort of architecture that considers the scale of the micron. So it really is an architecture where arguably invisibility is the client. But today we're here to talk about our collab with Moth Studios. And we are going to show for the first time, hopefully not the last output of the collaboration, in the shape of an essay film. Called Before Images / After Images. And this is the kind of main question that the film asks. How will quantum technologies and the kind of underlying physics impact visual culture in the coming years?
Mute this.
Oh no.
Brilliant. Right. Okay. So
we couldn't find a better way to explain why we're talking about quantum in the context of AI. So
the reason we're here talking to you about quantum when you signed up to come to a talk about AI and architecture is that roughly, it's fair to say that in 5 to 10 years' time, I would expect that there will be a quantum and architecture symposium at the AA. So whilst it's still in its nascency, quantum computing could offer a whole new set of affordances across different sectors and at different entry points in the technological stack. One of which is an integration with classical AI, whilst potentially offering ways to run AI in more energy efficient capacities. It is likely that quantum computing will also alter the qualitative outputs of AI tools, from producing models that can run on smaller datasets to generative models that are more readily able to incorporate divergence detected in datasets into outputs. But further than this relationship with classical AI, quantum computing brings with it a fundamentally different conception of computational processing at its foundations, which may give rise to technologies that engage with new ways of thinking and seeing. This research, in the context of creative architectural typological research and media theory, starts to speculate on how and where we can locate a conception of quantum aesthetics still very much in its infancy. Okay, here are some questions that we asked ourselves from the outset. Firstly, you'd have to define quantum, define aesthetics. Are quantum aesthetics stymied by the limits of current forms of media? Is this a problem of scale, sensing, and interpretation? Do humans sense classically? Scales, coherence, concurrence, and disjunctions. Atoms have no intrinsic colour. There is no such thing as a direct quantum aesthetic, only imprints or transpositions. Now, some of those are not questions, they're statements, and we will unpack all of those. Okay, so in pop culture at the moment, there are certain instantiations or touch points with quantum, and a great resource for this is John Donahue's lecture on quantum and pop culture. You know, it will often be, it's described as a narrative loop by Benedict Singleton of Rival Strategy. You know, and what he means is, if you can't really explain something in like a Marvel film, just call it quantum, and then everything. So it's a solve for, you know, any number of things that would maybe require a more adept script writer. So it means things that are very clever, it means things that are very complicated, and already it's a word, you know, that is semantically bleached and semantically satiated. I mean, my job really is as project lead working with artists and stuff is to give quantum a PR makeover, and it's really still in its, you know, infancy, but it is like a really loaded term. It's kind of retro-futurist. Similarly, so when we look at, like, you know, very on the face value of things like quantum aesthetics and try to just, like, you know, identify some, you see a lot of these kind of 90s aesthetics when you, like, this was like a graphic we saw at CERN, which is reminiscent of the Warp Records artificial intelligence cover. This is my personal theories that, like, the Neurofen guy, or person or humanoid, and this galaxy-brained companion on the right are similarly like typological characters you see recurring in whenever you Google quantum or whenever you sort of see quantum-coded imagery.
Yeah, and so we went to CERN, and then we saw kind of other things coming up, and we're thinking of other definitions that you'll see in the film, is that in quantum aesthetics, images kind of stopped depicting, like their main role is to kind of locate something. You know, like they always talk about a bump in the graph, right? They are pure statistical form. And even within the statistical form, and this is the thing, there is a huge discrepancy between, let's say, the kind of graph for scientists and the graph for audience, right? So one of them tends itself more to kind of data set mining, and the other one is Neurofen guy. So this is kind of the two balancing kind of points.
So this slide covers quite a few points that were in the original sort of list of questions and provocations. Now, one of the issues that we face, and this is probably a long-term issue, is the fact that humans sense classically. So if there is a quantum native aesthetic, let's say if it's like if we are trying to make music with a quantum computer, whether or not we would actually be able to receive the outputs of that in its own on the registers of communication that the signal is emitted is it's probably something that's not going to happen. So how that would be received is classically, and a good way to think about this is Carl Sagan's Flatland, where he explains the fourth dimension through the representation of a two dimension. So if you have a town that is flat, that is full of squares and circles, and one day an apple imprints itself on this 2D town, it will not appear to the to the occupants of this 2D town as a 3D object. It will just appear as a line. Now, similarly, Sagan goes on to say in a much more eloquent way than I am right now, that when we experience, if we experience the fourth dimension, it will only be in its capacities as a 3-dimensional object. So there are these limits of sensing, and this is a problem that quantum researchers, and particularly people who are operating at the forefront of quantum audio, are finding is that, when we receive quantum information, it is only going to be classically, and therefore there are going to be limits of sensing there.
Then again, I'll just let you read the text. But, okay, so we can't really sense it, but we could get close to it, or we can get close to the kind of infrastructures that make it happen. So particularly in the kind of context of tonight, it's really interesting to ask, like, what happens when we get close? Declan, you said it's like wanting to touch lava. Like, what happens when humans deal with this invisibility as a highly physical, material infrastructure that detects that invisibility?
So one of the things that is a regular theme in quantum broadly are themes of scales. We think particularly of like the Powers of 10 film, of coherence. So, at the subatomic scale, certain phenomena happen that don't scale up and don't happen on this meso scale. Concurrence, similarly, the logics and phenomena that dictate this scale break down and don't exist on the subatomic scale, and disjunctions. Now, one of the motifs in the film is the fact that, and this was something that I had elucidated to me recently at the Institute of Quantum Optics in Vienna, was that atoms don't actually have any intrinsic colour, which melted my brain a little bit. So whilst atoms don't have any intrinsic colour, they still participate in colour. This was like a big sort of jumping off point for trying to get a sense of what a quantum aesthetics might be. One of the things we also see actually behind this text is a image of an atom's shadow. It's the smallest thing ever photographed. And one of the problems, not necessarily a problem, but one of the themes that comes up again and again in quantum at the moment and using quantum technologies is scale and fidelity. You can see that this image is incredibly pixelated, and one of the things that I'll be showing you in a couple of slides is a video, and it's, I believe, the first time this has been done, a video that has been run through, the individual frames of it have been run through a tool called quantum blur. Now, quantum blur is essentially encoding and decoding images through quantum states. Sounds like really, really futuristic. And what you'll see, I do find visually very interesting, but it looks sort of just a bit distorted. And when we compare it to like the Mangle core future shock we might experience when we see some AI things, or when we see Montclair Pope and these things that really sort of, there's this sense of the future being drawn towards us. What we see often in quantum at the moment is very grainy images of very small things, or things that don't actually exist, like this. So quantum imaging is a technique that generates images with photons that have never touched the object. In this case, a sketch of a cat. So it's non-light based photography. And it's a very interesting underlying set of conditions that have given rise to this image. The image in and of itself, I would say aesthetically, is fairly unassuming. So please do look up Quantum Blur. It's a tool that our chief scientist, James Wooten, developed before he joined the company. It's really, really interesting. And essentially, I'll just reiterate what it is. It's for encoding images in quantum states. there's also a lot to be said about the type of imagery that Google decided to use in that launch video. Although I do believe we're rapidly running out of time, so I'll leave that can of worms unopened.
Yeah, just to kind of bring the conversation back to AI, but also to kind of spaces and the people that inhabit them. So a lot of the thinking that we've been doing is to identify quantum typologies alongside or as part of quantum aesthetics, but also identify the kind of causes and effects of these so-called quantum images, and in turn the kind of physical and spatial consequences of these. So the interesting thing here is that quantum ethics and aesthetics are not as mainstream, arguably, as AI, but the spatial typologies, again, arguably, in kind of popular culture, are a lot more evident, which is something interesting to consider in the context of a, let's say, architectural conversation. And the shapes they take are also something to be reckoned with, I think. But what is interesting also to see between AI and quantum is that there's almost this kind of reverse relationship between the images that populate the web, right? So if you Google an image of an AI scientist, it stops occupying, let's say, the physical. It's pure speculations, AI image. Whereas the images of quantum scientists are, always about the kind of pure materiality.
So we went to CERN recently, and we were. This is a theory that was outlined to us by someone who is native to Geneva, and he explained to us that the reason that the public-facing CERN was so austere was rooted in Austria's Protestant ethic, and he had a theory that CERN could have been built overground, but that would have been too showy, so they hid it underground. And then all the public-facing aspects of CERN are very austere. They are very much like a school cafeteria. It's very much like school trip vibes. And that is in order to show that all the money that they receive, they spend on, the important stuff, on the science. This is the theory of a local Genevan. This is not downstairs. This is the mediated nether zone between upstairs and downstairs, the liminal portal viewing box, and this is downstairs. So upstairs is Protestant coded, downstairs is Vatican coded. Everything is big, scale, it's, it looks decadent, shiny. Similarly, a spatial typology that we see a lot with the observation of quantum phenomena is that there are three things that need to be happening. It needs to be cold, needs to be dark, needs to be quiet. Now, somewhere that the Institute of Quantum Optics go and do some of their measurements is at the Conrad Observatory, which is in a cliff face in Austria, and there's no electricity. It's run off generators, and it's actually normally used for studying the Earth's core. It is incredibly quiet. So this is via Gunseli Alshinkaya, who Moth are working with at the moment. She has identified a quantum aesthetic of quantum steampunk. And similarly, we have started to see a kind of Cold War coded nuclear scare aesthetic. This was downstairs at CERN as well. This is also reflected in some of the technology.
But yeah, it was really important for us, also in the context of the film, to also think about what we decided today we're going to call the back rooms, in the context of spatial typologies, the places where the actual decisions happen, and where the kind of logistics of this, let's say, future
present, actually. Integration in the stack is decided. And interestingly, the predicted applications of this integration, which are obviously at such a large scale. So, as humans, but also, in context of architecture, we'll probably only experience the consequences of this timeline, as kind of third degree consequences in our everyday lives. So to leeway into the film, you'll see some of our answers to those kind of questions around what is quantum aesthetic as titles and words which have been quantum blurred. And enjoy. It's a quite meditative experience. Cool.
Good morning, everybody. So I have been at DARPA and IARPA helping one way or another shape almost every program for the last 15 years. I measured my success based on how many really dumb quantum things we could get the US government to not fund and spend our money on something else. I think I see some knowing nods from the audience, and I suspect from back at home, because anybody who's been in this field for a long time is aware that there is a lot of hype in the space that does not correspond to real world changing potential.
Until you look for it, it doesn't even exist.
Create my own reality.
We are looking for quantum images, not at them. These are not images of, but images about. Here, we find a way of seeing which in no way resembles vision, an image that is never there when we look, but instead is only there before and after. An image that is not the event. An image that is a typology rooted in its own detection, like these next images here in this film. A quantum aesthetic of probable and improbable translations.
Is the hype real? Is quantum computing going to change everything? That's an incredibly important question for the United States to answer, and at DARPA we believe that we can answer that question.
Here, you are looking at an image of a USB-2 stealth bomber detected by a prototype of a far-distance quantum radar. And here, you are looking at an image of a bird. But this bird does not exist. It only exists as a probability field, as a disruption, as a deviation, as a quantum aesthetic made visible as a statistical form. Just as atoms do not have color, yet participate in color, quantum aesthetics are not visible, yet they still participate in the visible as a set of contexts and conditions that give rise to deviations in visual fields. Deviations, but never the thing in itself, which forever slips out of reach. We populate the gaps this leaves with placeholders and stand-ins, images of ersatz futures, both probable and improbable. Quantum aesthetics are the antimatter of visual culture.
Those squiggles came from a real life experiment. So quantum radars can actually be built. They're not science fiction. And there's a picture to prove it.
Here, images don't depict, they locate. An aesthetic constructed not of quantum images, but of predictions, imprints, transpositions, synthetic data, molecular simulations, funding models, logistics charts, an aesthetic as a probability matrix. A probability matrix as a yet to be seen image. What remains are classical visions of quantum phenomena, like the imprints of a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional plane. An aesthetic that is pure context, signage, interpretation.
Welcome, sports fans! As the champions battle it out in the Tour de France, we invite you to get on your own bike for a rather special ride.
Here is an image of the smallest ever photographed thing, the shadow of an atom, originally without color, made orange so that you can see it. At CERN, images are deviations, correlations, validations, numbers in vast data sets made visible by infrastructures of measurement and detection, an infrastructure of typologies made visible so that we can all see. A researcher pointing at a magnet, a researcher at the canteen, two researchers on a break. Quantum aesthetics are the aesthetics of placeholders. It is about the images that come before the images after.
Thank you both. That was really interesting. We are 5 minutes from 8 o'clock, so I don't know if people want to stay for some questions. We might run a little bit over to ask some time to allow. I hope you all really enjoyed hearing about the different ways we can explore narratives. 3 very unique entries into the topic. I thought I'm just going to I might just ask one question to you guys first, and then open up to the floor. But we were talking to Laurent and Sasha, and thinking about kind of the ways that AI narratives around imagery have kind of run away from us, and thinking about the ideas of kind of like God or socialism. How important do you think it is to define a quantum aesthetic in terms of kind of gaining a control over a narrative?
Well, I don't know, and this is going to seem, I'm not trying to be slippy, but I don't know if one can I don't know if I subscribe to the idea that one can gain control of kind of culture's a bit rhizomatic, and it doesn't tend to work the way we expect it to. So whether or not one can gain control is, I don't know if that's a task I would even think it would be worth assigning oneself. We're already seeing a vast number of entry points into playing with quantum aesthetically. A lot of the undercurrents are sometimes to do with what is called quantum woo, which is the side of quantum that's like new age philosophy, receptions of quantum, like quantum vibrations, and this brings with it a whole kind of aesthetic palette that's being deployed quite a lot, and that tells a story that is not necessarily always faithful to scientific reality, which can similarly, I guess, be a language of placeholders and can be quite dry. So there are a number of different quantum quantum aesthetics that would have kind of claim to the throne, and there are a number of different conceptions of it. I kind of want to see it get more wild. I think let's just all start having a bit of fun with it.
No, I mean, yeah.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience?
Well, I think about Trevor Paglen's great essay, No Invisible Images.
Yeah.
And I think the key thing there is the moving from an image as a thing that we see, right? Like primarily sort of retinal or optical thing to an image that does things, right? And obviously images that are then I was obviously talking about it in relation to like machine learning and data sets and that kind of stuff. But there's something there, which is kind of post-seeing images. And so I think we're already there, aren't we? And in a way, I think what Trevor reminds us is that there's sort of cute convenience to the fact that we can see images, digital images today, but that's not their primary function at all. No, it's everything but that in a way. And so I think what you're talking about in terms of like sort of in terms of quantum aesthetics being also like not non-retinal and deviations in probability, and I mean basically kind of non-scopic regime of images. Like images are already doing that, aren't they, in a way? And images are I think the true efficacy or the functionality of images are what they do, right, within these vast the kingdom of networkedness that we're all sort of idly part, and involuntarily part of. And so, I wonder whether, in that sense, that this sort of sense of departing from the difficulty of an aesthetic, of a quantum aesthetic, is, I mean, I'm not suggesting for a minute that you're proposing it as a difficulty. I know you're not, but I feel like we're already there. It's just that images, like I think of images, digital images, as alibis today. You know, they've been alibis for a long time. And I think what you were talking about, Declan, in terms of like post-lens photography, you know, that already happened, no? In terms of, if you think about like the Barthian thing about the punctum and, you know, like the engraving of light that has reflected off, you know, your grandmother's face that's then on silver bromide, to the skip from that to like digital is like already such a massive like ontological shift, isn't it? That already happened like decades ago. And so these things have already been happening. And so in that sense, it feels to me that, you know, this sort of quantum aesthetics is definitely part of a lineage, isn't it? And not necessarily like some completely alien sort of deviation or appearance, no, right? It's already been part of these histories of,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't want to hog the mic, but the really important thing for me and my role in Moth is to situate quantum not as the kind of narrative loop, or not as like a promise that it's gonna give you a sense of future shock immediately. It's more also to place it, and we are working towards doing this with certain projects, of placing you know, the use of quantum computers in the lineage of let's say if it's in audio, of computer music, of, you know, Ianakis Xenakis serialism, and placing it in quite a long and considered lineage that I do think helps to kind of contextualize and maybe narrativize these things, that it's not like it's not a case of like, you know, making everything hyper futuristic and ahistorical. It is also situating it historically. I am going to stop speaking and I won't answer the next question.
No, but I think a lot of the conversations we had, and particularly being part of this today, was really helpful, because going back to invisible images, it is another form of invisibility. I guess it functions in a different way, but it's maybe more, and I think we alluded to that, maybe a bit more material, weirdly, like, you know, in how it appears in the world, simply because the infrastructures that make it happen need to be more, I mean, bigger. See CERN, right? So it's definitely part of a lineage, and I think it's actually really nice to talk about these aesthetics in the context of AI, for example, and then, you know, trace it back. You can trace it back to painting, you know.
Yeah, quick question. Did you look into the aesthetics of natural quantum devices?
Could you give me an example?
Oh, there are hundreds of examples. There's a very important one, a very important quantum machine that makes life on Earth possible.
Please tell us.
Chlorophyll. Yeah, that's a quantum machine.
Add it to the list. It's an open ledger. To be added to. I do also have to stress that I really think we should have a question for Laurent before we end, because I'm not.
Scouring my piece of paper with questions on it. I guess this is kind of a question for both Sasha and Laurent. You guys were talking about kind of thinking about like these narratives outside of the way we're using AI now, and kind of like how we worship them, and how we explore science fictions, but I wonder if you find any value in actually engaging with, I think we had a couple of people last week that used traditional AI tools like DALL-E and Midjourney. Like, do you think that there's a benefit to engaging with these tools in kind of the discussions about narrative? And yeah, basically.
Yeah, so hi. Okay. Yeah, so I think part of my argument is that artificial intelligence in the form of generative AI is quite inescapable, in the sense like, even if you're not engaging directly with ChatGPT, like Google runs on similar models. They've sold their models to Meta, like you're just scrolling on your feed and you're engaging with AI. So in that sense, when you're engaging with big tech products, it's quite inescapable. And I guess that's also part of like my lineage, I guess, of my practice would be to find ways of like practical resistance within these tools because they're so inescapable, and also thinking of transforming the form. I was thinking more like in relation to previous questions, but maybe I'll go in that direction then, because I also do like creative coding. I used to be an engineer like back in the day, and thinking about digital images, like what you're actually seeing as pixels on the screen, like are actually mathematics, they are statistics, everything can be mathematically manipulated. So one of my projects is a computational photography project where I transform the image using Python into its mathematical form and just use formulas without knowing what sort of image would come out afterwards, using that as a way of destroying the image or like blurring it or transforming it. And I feel like that's kind of one of the potentials that I see for quantum, which would be like a very precise random number generator, very precise mathematics. And when you're thinking about anything digital as its mathematical form, like that can create very interesting imagery. And so like in the context of AI, like ChatGPT and DALL-E, I personally don't think that it's bad to engage with these tools. In terms of ChatGPT, personally, I haven't really used it for anything super imaginative. And I feel like when I asked it to code things for me, I'm just like correcting its mistakes. So, but in DALL-E, like, DALL-E is the image one, right? And I personally like putting my work through in DALL-E and like all these images, generative images, because I'm really interested in how they're reading my images and like associating the work that I make as an image maker in its database, or like how would it try to understand my work, because I'm quite confident that there's very few people who make work that looks like me. So I enjoy that part of the process. Yeah, that was really long-winded.
No, great, thank you. Sasha, would you like to talk to the question?
It's an interesting question because there's so many ways to answer it. I think I personally am slightly terrified about the potential energy cost. So somehow I feel slightly guilty if I use generative AI for no reason. And sometimes I use it for a reason. Like recently I've been looking at digital humans and bots, and I've made like 3 versions of myself trying to figure out what exactly is so gothic about it. So, but I think in general for me, the AI generated so-called slop, or like these low quality images with artifacts, are interesting in the context of this future separation into AI automated content that people consume without noticing, or low quality content like advertisements, like stock images, not low quality, but let's say often used and not very significant in terms of meaning. And then handmade quality content, like this is the horrible imaginary of the future that for some reason is stuck in my head. I don't know, I think there was something actually returning to the question of aesthetics. something I think is valuable to think about aesthetics in their TikTok meaning, in meaning of viral strategy or something that is viral and replicated and spreads, rather than something that is canon and is solidified, or that is kind of art history style gets solidified over years and years. And there's something about that type of aesthetics, both in AI-generated images and AI-generated porn. If someone hasn't seen Unstable Diffusion Discord yet, it's very not safe for work, but I highly recommend it because it's a perfect illustration for how mindless and mind-numbing AI generators are. Because, of course, porn that is generated is extremely unimaginative, and it falls very neatly into categories upon which it was actually originally probably trained. But there's one channel which is called Synthetic Horrors, where all of the anatomical mistakes are collected. And this is something that I find is a weird digital culture artifact. I think sometimes, occasionally, when infrastructure fails, these type of interesting case studies occur. But I don't think that generative AI in itself is so interesting, or in terms of image making. And yeah, I'm excited for the virtual partners, boyfriends, girlfriends situations, but also from the cyberfeminist point of view, not from the commercial point of view. Actually, I have a small question to Lauren, if it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was very curious. Sorry, I think I missed 1/4 of your presentation because I had some sound issues in the beginning, but I was very intrigued by the use of this Gothic fonts and Gothic imagery. And I'm also kind of deeply attuned to the something in it, in the conjunction of the current AI tech and these pseudo-medieval, but then also this kind of cyber-Gothic aesthetics, again, in the TikTok sense. And I was curious, what do you think about that? And why did you choose that particular imagery and also like this spiritual style? Well, spiritual I understand, but this old school style book.
Yeah, I think my research project was also about trying to contextualize AI in a larger human history, to be like, hey, today we're talking about AI like it's a really big evil that's going to take over the world, and like it's going to give us nirvana and grace and things like that. And so it was just like using the aesthetic as a callback, and also because there is a certain image of like an AI aesthetic, which kind of relates to your talks too. I just wanted to show maybe like a contrast in like very austere type of AI image, or like because there is a canon, I guess, of what an AI image looks like right now, and we're creating that canon, and it is an uncanny valley, like wrong limbs and things like that, that in a way it's kind of limiting the understanding of what AI could look like. Yeah, and that was more of my approach, to make it look kind of ancient, but also like how I imagine it was like a speculative fiction that's not situated in the future, but in the present, and like in a present that you haven't met before. Yeah.
Fab. Thank you, guys. Can we give another round of applause to everyone? It's been so wonderful. Thank you guys for sitting through the extra 15 minutes as well. If you want to get a drink, there's drinks in the corner on the left. Please speak to our lovely speakers, and I'm sure Sasha will be happy to answer any questions. If you want to send her an email, we can send the contact details out afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Bye, guys.